Hello world and welcome. I am Karhu the Great Bear of the North, and this is Karhu Electric Park in Planet Coaster. We've got some big things going on this episode. And when I mean big, I mean really, really big. Not quite as big as this thing, as the Electric Tower. I originally wanted to build a tower here based after the Dreamland Tower in Dreamland, part of Coney Island in 1906, which voiceover Karhu will get to a little bit later on. But this electric tower is simply far too large. It's about twice as large as what I wanted. So unfortunately, that very large thing is a very large mistake, which costs us $3,000. But that's, you live and you learn. As you guys may see, I've created this multi-tiered platform because maybe you've also noticed I love tiering in these kinds of games. I just love the visuals of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this 4 square by 4 square block. This is about 16 meters by 16 meters, which is about like 52 or 53 feet by 53 feet. Slightly bigger than the actual Dreamland Tower. And this is going to be instead our electric tower. And this is going to rise to about 84 meters or 21 of these tiles high. And while I am doing all of this, let's go to voiceover Karhu to tell you a little bit more about Beaux-Arts and the architectural style of the World's Fairs of the time. Alright, thank you very much, past Karhu, Gameplaying Karhu, for inviting me to explain a little bit the Beaux-Arts movement. And buckle up, folks, this is going to take quite a bit to go through. We're going to talk about where the Beaux-Arts movement came from, we're going to talk about major Beaux-Arts buildings, we're going to talk about the social implications of Beaux-Arts, and we're even going to talk about some of the core features of Beaux-Arts. So, I hope you like architectural history, because oh my goodness, do I love architectural history. Now, I think the best place to start when we're talking with the Beaux-Arts movement is what it was a response to. It was actually a response to a response. It was a response to a response to this Baroque architecture. And I don't know about you, but I cannot stand Baroque architecture. It is simply too much, it's too busy. I often say, if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. And in response to the excesses, the indulgences, the chaos of Baroque architecture, a lot of people in Europe, a lot of architects decided to go back to the origins, if you will, back to the Greeks and back to the Romans. And this is the neoclassical style. They also kind of went neoclassical in the Renaissance as well with Palladio, but that's a different story for a different channel on a different day. And a lot of buildings in the 18th and 19th century were very much neoclassical. You see this a lot in the federal architecture of the United States. The Capitol building is neoclassical. The White House is neoclassical. The British Museum in London is neoclassical. You can probably think of many, many more examples yourself, but they are all neoclassical. It's very rigid, it's very formal, there's not a lot of decoration. And starting in the 19th century, the 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century, after the French Revolution, people in France, a group of 4 architects at the Académie des Beaux-Arts, decided to reject that. Not reject it wholesale, but reject elements of it. They didn't like the rigidity of it. They didn't like the formality of it. They actually brought back a little bit of Baroque playfulness into the Beaux-Arts style. At its core, the Beaux-Arts style can be described as either eclectic or even syncretist, taking a bunch of different elements from a bunch of different architectural styles and architectural theories to create one unified whole. And since there was so much vocabulary from all of these different styles, Beaux-Arts architects could really have a lot of fun with what they were doing. Beaux-Arts buildings tended to have flat roofs, so we didn't have the arched roofs that we would see elsewhere. They tended to have the ground floor from Renaissance style used to be both rusticated and raised, which is why in the expo buildings, the first floor is actually 8 meters tall in Karhu Electric Park, whereas the others are only 6 meters tall. And it tends to have a lot of arched windows, it tends to have a lot of arched doors, and it tends to have a lot of classical details. They did still like the dignity and the formality of a lot of the classical pieces, which is why you see a lot of columns in Beaux-Arts architecture, although you don't necessarily see it exclusively columns, if that makes any sense. You see a lot of incorporation of statues, both into the building itself and into the grounds, because based on my understanding, Beaux-Arts was the first style that really drew from other art forms as well. Yes, there was a lot of excess, there was a lot of ornamentation in Baroque or Baroque, but I really believe that Beaux-Arts was the first one to take a look at buildings as sculpture. And if you are familiar with architectural history, please correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't studied architectural history since university, and that was nearly 2 decades ago, so I'm probably forgetting quite a bit. And in addition to all of the columns and the arcades and the arched windows and the classical inspired statues, there was still a lot of smaller classical details, like the balustrades, the festoons, the pilasters, the bas-relief sculptures, which you would see, say, over the entryway to a Greek temple, for example. They had really, really nice cornices, and every so often there was just little bits of, it's called swag, not the swag that kids from 8 or 9 years ago used to say that they were so good at, but swag in the sense of little architectural ornamental details, like sculptural boughs of holly or garlands that would just be kind of draped over a wall. That is what swag is. But above all of this, Beaux-Arts required symmetry. There was no imbalances from the east facade to the west facade or the north to the south. Everything, it wasn't square, but it was balanced and it was symmetrical. Just like in the lagoon at Carhu Electric Park, you have the exact same building on the west side of the lagoon as you do on the east side of the lagoon. So there's symmetry on that axis with the carousel and the big wheel, and now this electric tower all lining up along a central axis with the lagoon. You also had east and west symmetry almost reflected across the lagoon, but each of those exposition buildings is also reflected kind of on its left and right sides, so they're mirror images of each other. So it's almost like the entire lagoon can be divided into 4 building quadrants. And this symmetry, this balance, this formality is to me what the Beaux-Arts movement is all about, which is why to me it's often associated with government buildings, with museums, with universities. If it is a high art, if it is a high institution, as opposed to the common institutions of movie theaters or something like this, that is what I associate with Beaux-Arts. And even though France had kind of discarded the Beaux-Arts ideas by the late 19th century, there were a lot of American architects that were studying at the French architectural schools in Rome and in Paris, and they brought that style back with them. There's a lot of Beaux-Arts buildings in the United States. Ironically, even though it was created in France, I actually see Beaux-Arts as more of an American style, just because of how many buildings there are in the Beaux-Arts style throughout the United States. And what does this have to do with the World's Fairs? Good question. Daniel Burnham, a Chicago architect and urban planner, was tasked with creating the design documentation for the Grand Colombian Exposition in 1893, and kind of as a compromise to a lot of the East Coast designers who originally wanted the World's Fair that year to be in New York City. Daniel Burnham hired a lot of New York designers. He hired Frederick Law Olmsted, who was responsible for designing Central Park. He had J.W. Root, who was responsible for designing Grand Central Station in New York City. And he also hired another local architect called Charles Atwood, and they brought the Beaux-Arts style with a very distinct kind of idea of social and civic virtue. They believed that architecture and urban planning and landscape architecture, when fused together, could create something called the City Beautiful movement. And this was basically an idea that if we give people grand civic spaces for them to use, then poverty would go away. And there's so many problematic things with that. It is not a sound theory of social design. I hate using the word social design, but that's pretty much what it was. They thought that they could make people less stupid and less poor if they just gave them smart buildings. It's completely flawed, but it does still come up with a lot of really, really beautiful architecture. For example, the mall in Washington, D.C. is based on the City Beautiful movement. There's a lot of Beaux-Arts urban design in Washington, D.C., with the central access, with the symmetry on both sides, with the scale of the civic of the civic architecture. And it really is inspirational. I'm not saying that City Beautiful ideas aren't inspirational, but they don't get rid of poverty. The way that they got rid of poverty was just by kicking out all the poor people from the site of the Chicago World's Fair. They literally demolished, not quite tent cities, but they demolished slums and tenements that they would later build this white city, this idealized version of a city filled with electric lights and white plaster everywhere. It was basically their coming out statement. It was this is the future of American urban centers. This is the future, and people bought into it. They loved it. They saw all the electricity everywhere. They saw how clean it was. But that's because they had virtual armies of custodians going around everywhere, cleaning everything. And again, it's because they kicked all of the poor people out. Like, it's easy to make a society seem rich and powerful, and that there is no poverty when you just forcibly remove those in poverty, right? So again, like I said, there are definitely problems in terms of the City Beautiful movement from a social perspective, but from an architectural perspective, I absolutely adore it. I love the balance, both in the buildings and in the actual spaces themselves. Okay, that's enough about Beaux-Arts history and the problems associated with the City Beautiful movement and some little details that most of you are probably going to be like, oh, why is he talking about balustrades and pilasters? But here are some examples of Beaux-Arts buildings. This is the Grande Galerie de l'Évolution at the Paris Museum of Natural History. Note the arcades, note the symmetry on the eastern and the western sides. Note the relatively flat roofs, although this does deviate from that a little bit. But note at the very balanced use of architectural sculpture throughout it. Right? We have the seated individual in the middle, we have the rosettes, we have, I forget what these are called, but these little details up the building, up the top on the roof, and we do have bas-relief on each of the friezes on the eastern and western domes. I think this is an absolutely beautiful building. We also have, this is the Grand Palais in Paris, just near the Champs-Élysées and the Louvre. And again, you do have columns, but these are, I believe these are Baroque columns rather than classical columns, and there is still a large amount of sculptural architecture that is involved. And these little rosettes, again, I forget the architectural term, but that are tied directly into the building itself. It is almost like the building is a sculpture, and we get these rounded windows that we do see in my own buildings as well. Even bridges can be considered to be Beaux-Arts. This is a bridge in the Netherlands, and you can see it's also very similar to the Pont Alexandre Bridge in Paris as well, which is right near the Grand Palais. And you see these archways with these little bits these little bits of sculptural ornamentation. Again, this is very much Beaux-Arts. And in Ottawa, in Canada, where I'm from, this is a former railway station. Beaux-Arts is so linked to railway stations in North America. Grand Central, I believe Penn Station is also Beaux-Arts. Union Station in Toronto is Beaux-Arts. This is a former train station in Montreal, Beaux-Arts. St. Louis's old Union Station is Beaux-Arts, I believe, as well as Kansas City's. So a lot of train stations, a lot of civic architecture is based in this style. And again, we do have the repeated columns, the formality of that. This is a very muted Beaux-Arts, but we do still have the rusticated ground story. We do still have the arched windows, and we do still have the symmetry and the formality. This is the Hockey Hall of Fame, which is weird. At least for me, it's distinct in Beaux-Arts because the entrance is actually on a corner. So the symmetry is actually kind of radial symmetry, not simply east-west symmetry, but it does have a lot of these sculptural details that you will find in Beaux-Arts architecture. It's almost like if you took the excesses of Baroque and refined them and made them actually tasteful, you'd get Beaux-Arts. It's absolutely beautiful. This is the New York Public Library. Again, you see the symmetry on the east and west sides, the arched entryways. There's also, all of these buildings tend to have what's called polychromy, which there are differences in buildings, but there are differences in colors, but they're very, very subtle. And this is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. This is the eastern entrance, and again, you do see a lot of the classic designs. You see the flat roofs. You see the incorporation of sculptural elements into the building. You see the arched windows. You see the columns on the front. You see the rusticated ground story, and it's raised. You even see the coins going all the way up the corners. You see these lovely friezes. It's just an absolute beautiful example of Beaux-Arts, and this is what I mean when I associate it very much with museums. And Beaux-Arts goes all the way to Australia. It's spread throughout, and this is the Flinders Street Station, I hope I'm pronouncing Flinders right, in Melbourne. And this is, the polychromy in this is definitely more pronounced than it is in typical Beaux-Arts buildings, but you do still see the flat roofs, the balustrades at the top of the building, the arched entryways, the use of iron and glass, use of modern materials over classical and very eclectic styles. And to me, Flinders Street Station is a little bit busy, and that might be because of the polychromy, but it's still a very, very good example of Beaux-Arts buildings. So I hope that this very, very brief and very, very quick and dirty and possibly very wrong oversight into the Beaux-Arts style gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm going for in Kahu Electric Park and why it is so associated with World's Fairs in American architecture at the time. If you have any questions, if there's anything else you would like to know about the Beaux-Arts style or about architecture of this time period in general, please put a comment in the comments section below and I will try to get to it as soon as I can. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. 3 hours later, we finally have the Electric Tower. And this is so much better than I thought it would be. I absolutely adore this. This is so much more than I hoped it could be, so much more than I was imagining, so much more than I could possibly have dreamed. Like, this is exactly what I wanted this thing to look like. And this level of lighting detail is going to be everywhere. I'm going to put more detail, certainly around Through the Ages. We're definitely going to need to look at that at some point in time in the future. But these things on the side, and then this trim here, all of it is going to be to the same level of light-up awesomeness as the tower. I love the searchlights. I love that thing so much. Like, this side of this building is going to be just as lit up as this. And I know the Blaze of Steel had said that the all-white everything is... some things tend to get washed out, everything kind of looks flat. And I agree. But blaze of steel. This is not designed to look good in the day. This is designed to look absolutely epic at night. And I think I'm accomplishing that. There will be more color spread throughout the park. I guarantee you that. Certainly once we get the foliage in on the exhibition hall, things will pop a lot more. Once we get the upper stories and the actual exhibits inside. And I don't know actually what's going to go on in most of this, but once that comes in, then everything's going to look... Everything is coming up Millhouse. This is so good. It seems like I'm like bragging or something, but I just really, really like the aesthetic of this. With like the Ferris wheel in front. Like how does it look from across the way? Yeah, I mean, yeah, depth of field and it's a little bit far, so a lot of the lights are blinking out just because of the computer resolution and things like this. Once you get closer, just yo, this, I'm so pleased with this. Oof, goosebumps, chills. I guess thinks Ferris wheel is too expensive. I think this might be my favorite build in Planet Coaster or Planet Zoo that I've done. This, yeah, I just love this. Let's just go down to $15 for the Ferris wheel, $536. It's fine. We are making about $3,500 a month in profit. Shops and facilities costing me a lot. Still not profiting with this restaurant, but I'd rather just let the money go into it rather than have to micromanage it all the time. But folks, this is what I've been talking about. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. What does this building need? Does it need anything? Or is it pretty good as is? I'm very much enjoying this. Yes, there will be extra things done around here. There will be foliage, there will be gardens, there will be, little stalls. There might even be a swing ride around here or something back here. I don't know. But for now, what do you think of the Electric Tower? I'm Carter, the Great Bear of the North. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see, please please subscribe, hit the bell to get the notifications so you know exactly when these videos are coming out. But most importantly, and I really do mean it, have an absolutely fantastic day. I hope that your day is as bright as the Electric Tower. And if it's not, that's okay too. Either way, I do wish you the best. Bye, everybody.